Today, inshallah, we will be talking about chapters 3 and 4. We will try to talk about the most important points uh, in these chapters. The first chapter here, in chapter 3, the title is The Trial in London. The trial of whom? If you look here, you'll find that I'm writing trial, okay? trial يا جماعة يعني محاكمة يعني. Of course, the trial has some components, and the first component here is the accused, the person who committed the crime. The accused person here is Charles Darnay. Charles Darnay. What about his charge? I mean, here the crime that he committed. He was accused of being a spy, And we have another component, another element in the trial, the judge, of course, and we had here a lawyer, Mr. Stryver, and his assistant, whose name was Sidney Carton. We have some witnesses. The first one is John Barsad, and the second one is Roger Klein. The third one is Mr. Lorry, and Lucy Manette, Dr. Manette, and a man with red hair. Of course, we talked about chapter 1 and chapter 2 in a video. Okay, so we'll start now from chapter 3. Okay, here the first point in this page. The writer is telling us, Charles Dickens is telling us about Telesands Bank. We know that Telesands Bank was the most famous bank at this time, and it had two branches. The first one is in France, and the second one is in England. And here the writer is telling us about a hint about this bank. This bank, what was unusual about Telesands Bank? This bank was a dirty place. It was very small, it was very dark, very ugly, it was old-fashioned, and so on. So this is a very important question. This is the first question here, is that what was special about the workers of Telesands Bank? Telesands Bank was a dirty place. It was very small, dark, and ugly. It was old-fashioned. The workers of the bank were proud of its smallness, darkness, and ugliness, and they believed that the more unpleasant and ugly the bank was, the more respectable it appeared. It's okay? This is the first point. After that, in this chapter, we'll find that there is another character whose name was Jerry Cruncher. Jerry Cruncher. Jerry Cruncher ده يا جماعة كان a messenger from the bank, from Telesands Bank, and the bank sent him to a court, محكمة يعني, which was at this time called Old Bailey. ده اسم المحكمة Old Bailey. Old Bailey كان فيها trial. There was a trial at Old Bailey for Charles Darnay. طبعا I'd like to remind you of Charles Darnay. Charles Darnay was a French man. He was about 25 years old. And this man, Mr. Lorry and Lucy Manette and Dr. Manette met him on the ship or on the boat when they came back from France to England. It's okay in chapter 2. So this man, they met him. And this man was accused of being a spy. اتهموه بأنه جاسوس يعني, who had some information from England to tell King Louis in France about these pieces of information, about the size of the army and so on. Right. So Jerry Cruncher went there in order, his task was to collect a message from Mr. Lorry, who was waiting inside the court to give his testimony. So Mr. Lorry was a witness there. was a witness there. When he arrived, I mean here Jerry Cruncher, when he arrived at Old Bailey, the court, he asked the doorman and he asked him a question by saying, "What is the next case? What is the next case?" So we have here another question. What is the next case? You can find it as a comment. These words were said by Jerry Cruncher. It's okay. A messenger who at worked at Telesands Bank to the doorman at the Old Bailey. Old Bailey is the name of the court, which was one of the most famous criminal courts at this time. I mean here in London, of course. It was the case of Charles René, who was accused of being a spy and having secret information about the English army. Okay, so when he arrived there, we can find that Charles René, who was a Frenchman, was accused of being a spy as he traveled from England to France and had secret information about the English army. Of course, when the trial began, we have a lawyer, and the lawyer's name here was Mr. Stryver. Mr. Stryver, this was the name of the lawyer, okay, and he had an assistant whose name was Sidney Carton. At the beginning, he started, and we know here that Charles René was accused of being a spy and of helping King Louis, the French king at this time, in his wars against the King of England. And he was charged with having given lists of the army, the same lists that the British had sent to North America over the past 5 years. So the most important thing here is that Mr. Stryver would try to prove that Charles Darnay was innocent. And by the way, Charles Darnay was innocent. He wasn't a spy at all. Okay? So he will start here, Mr. Stryver, I mean, by the first witness. I told you before that we have some witnesses, and the first one here today will be John Barsad. John Barsad was the first witness. ده أول شاهد يا جماعة. الشاهد الأول اللي جاي يقول إن Charles Darnay was a spy. It's okay? طيب let's see. أنا حابب بس أتأكد إن الناس معايا. ف أروى نديم كده عايز أسمع بس الدنيا صوت واصل كده وتمام. أروى شريف.
يا مستر الصوت شغال.
تمام تمام شكرا. اوكي نرجع تاني يا جماعة to the text itself. The first one here, the first witness was John Barsad, as I told you. John Barsad ده يا جماعة he يعني charged أو he accused Charles René of being a spy. جاي يقول كده. طيب Mr. Stryver would try the lawyer for the defense questioned Barsad. يعني he asked him some questions. He asked him, have you ever been a spy yourself? And John Barsad here said no. Have you ever been in prison? He said no. Never in debtor's prison? He said maybe. It's okay. Perhaps 2 or 3 times. Have you ever been accused of dishonesty? It was only in a game of cards by a drunken liar. So this man was a bad one. It's okay. So how could he give his testimony and he was a very bad one? Okay, so John Barsad was a witness against Darnay, but he wasn't a good one at all. And at the end of the conversation between him and Mr. Stryver, who was the lawyer, he asked him a very important question. Have you ever borrowed money from the prisoner and from Charles Darnay? Have you ever taken money, borrowed money from him? He said yes. طب have you paid the prisoner back يعني have you paid the money back to the prisoner to Charles René he said no طب how could بقى you accuse him of being a spy and you didn't pay him the money back okay so of course at the end of the conversation between Mr. Stryver and جون برصاد يعني خلاص شهادته كده ايه بطلت. The second witness appeared كان روجر كلاي. Roger Cly was a former servant of Darnay, and he claimed that he had seen the lists in question in the prisoner's drawer. جاي يقول كده he accused برضه Charles Darnay of being a spy. جاي يقول كده لأن بيقول أنا شفت معاه lists in question in the prisoner's drawer لأنه كان servant عنده. طبعا تشارلز دارني يا جماعة أساسا he was from aristocratic class and he left France because he didn't like his family and the way that they treated people, poor people, I mean. So he decided to leave France and to stay in England. And then after the conversation between Mr. Stryver and Roger Cly admitted that he had once been a thief. علشان كده مستر سترايفر خلاص اعتبر برضه او المحكمة بقى اعتبروا ان his testimony طبعا was false ما يعتدش بيها. The third witness here was Mr. Lorry. Mr. Lorry طبعا came in order to give his testimony برضه نفس الكلام and Mr. Stryver asked him some questions. Mr. Jarvis Lorry, are you a clerk in Telesands Bank? He said, yes, I am, because as you know that Mr. Lorry was a banker in Telesands Bank. And because he was a banker, he came to Old Bailey in order to give his testimony. فضلا عن إنه he met Charles Darnay on board the ship that came back from France to England. Mr. Stryver asked Mr. Lorry some questions about Charles Darnay, and he told him that he met this man, I mean here Charles Darnay, he met him when they returned from France to England on the same ship. طيب. When Mr. Stryver asked Mr. Lorry, were you traveling alone, Mr. Lorry, or with companions? يعني كان معاك حد ولا كنت alone لوحدك? And with two companions. Of course, the two companions here were Lucy Manette and Dr. Manette. طيب. Lucy Manette كده her turn came جه الدور بتاعها بقى. She stood up and Mr. Stryver asked her, have you seen the prisoner before? She said, yes, sir. Where? On board the ship just now referred to, sir, and on the same occasion. يعني it means here that Lucy Manette and her father, Dr. Manette, met the prisoner, Charles Darnay, on the same ship. علشان كده we have here a very important question in the comment. On board the ship just now referred to, sir, and on the same occasion. Because these words were said by Lucy Manette to Mr. Stryver at the Old Bailey, the court, when he asked her if she had seen the prisoner Charles Darnay before and where. And that was her reply. They met him while returning from France with Mr. Lorry. It's okay. So when Lucy Manette talked about Charles Darnay, we can find here that Lucy Manette told Mr. Stryver that he was a very good one. He was a very gentle young man because he helped her as her father was still ill. It's okay. And he was still in a very weak state. After that, Dr. Manette. جه بقى دور Dr. Manette. طبعا Dr. Manette, he was uh, the fifth witness in our trial today. So Dr. Manette Mr. Stryver asked him some questions, okay, uh, by saying, "Do you remember seeing him on the night referred to by the previous two witnesses?" He said, "I don't, sir." "Are there any special reasons?" يعني بيقول أنا مش فاكره. ليه؟ قال له yes, my mind was completely blank يعني empty. As my daughter said, I was in a weak state of health. طبعا Dr. Manette, as you know in chapter 2, he didn't remember anything. It's okay, he didn't remember even his name. If you ask him about his name, he will say 105 North Tower. So he didn't remember anything because he stayed in the Bastille for 18 years. So till this point we can find that all the witnesses يعني ما حدش فيهم في اتنين منهم بس هم اللي جايين يتهموا اتهام صريح to تشارلز دورني لكن the others ما حدش قال حاجة تدين يعني تشارلز دورني. But now we can find that the sixth witness who we don't know his name, by the way. You will say that this witness with red hair. يعني if you want to talk about this man, you will say, and this will be the last witness in our chapter here, a man with red hair. We don't know his name. But the first one was John Barsad. The second one was Roger Klein. The third one, Mr. Lorry, Lucy Manette, Dr. Manette, and the last one was a man with red hair. خد بالك بقى ان a man with red hair ده يعني he told the judge that he had seen the prisoner at a hotel in a town where there were English soldiers and ships. فده جاي يتهم اتهام صريح برضه. طيب. Of course here Mr. Stryver would try to help Charles Darnay to clear his name from this charge. لأن الcharge دي يا جماعة كان البانشمنت بتاعها was يعني to lose his life. خلاص هيتعدم. Sidney Carton, the assistant of Mr. Stryver, Sidney Carton was a very clever man, by the way. But this man يعني thought of something while the trial continued. Sidney Carton looked like دي الحاجة اللي نفعت بقى إن Sidney Carton looked like Charles Darnay. هو كان يشبهه جدا. It's okay. So he thought of a trick. So this is called identification trick. حب يعمل trick على الwitness, the last witness. طبعا with the help of Mr. Stryver لأن Mr. Stryver was the lawyer who was talking uh, يعني as a lawyer in front of the judge. طبعا defending means Charles Darnay. فكتب كده ورقة. I mean here Sidney Carton. He wrote a small piece on a small piece of paper and passed it to Mr. Stryver. When Mr. Stryver looked at this piece of paper, he noticed a trick. Let's see what was this identification trick. Now Mr. Stryver asked the last witness, the man with red hair, and he said to him, "The man you saw was indeed the prisoner, or someone who looked like him." ها متأكد? Are you sure that the prisoner, it's okay, that you saw was a man here? This is the prisoner, Charles Darnay, or someone who looked like him? قال له I'm sure he was the prisoner. خلاص تمام. Well, look at the gentleman over there. طبعا pointing at his assistant Sidney Carton. He looks like the prisoner, doesn't he? طالما إن الوitness got confused يبقى في الحالة دي شهادته تبطل. لأن Sidney Carton stood up. تمام. Here أهو. Sidney Carton was dirty طبعا and untidy in his appearance. لكن everyone in the court was surprised by the likeness between him and the prisoner because they looked like each other. So the man with red hair said, I have to admit that they look similar. فكده خلاص. طبعا it is so easy to find a man who looks like the prisoner in this room, so it is not possible that the man you saw in the hotel was in fact another person. علشان كده the red-haired man was astonished as his evidence was proved worthless. وطبعا finally ايه اللي حصل؟ The trial came to an end and the jury, I mean here the judges, went out, and during this time Mr. Carton sat and looking at the ceiling as usual. وفي نهاية الأمر the jury, I mean the judge here, the judges made their decision بإيه؟ إن Charles Darnay not guilty. طبعا of course they were so happy and Charles Darnay of course was so happy because يعني he escaped death. كان زمانه دلوقتي هيموت خلاص. That's being recalled to life as Jerry Cruncher said يعني. طيب. So we have here some other questions. دول خلاص احنا قلناهم. Comment number 1 and 2. And we have question number 1. طيب. What was Charles Darnay accused of? If you find this question, he was accused of being a spy, of helping Louis, the French king, in his war against the King of England. He was charged with having given lists of information to the French about the nature uh, of the army. طب who was Mr. Stryver? Mr. Stryver ده كان مين يا جماعة؟ He was the main lawyer working on behalf of Charles Darnay, and he was a large man who looked older than his years. طب مين الاسيستنت بتاعه؟ كان سيدني كارتون. طيب. Is there any question يا جماعة؟ أنا كده فاتح المايكات بحيث لو حد عنده question.
هو ده هينزل على اليوتيوب صح؟
تمام.
تمام شكرا.
chapter 3 كده في أي مشاكل؟ Is there any problem؟ أنا فاتح المايك لكله بحيث لو حد عنده سؤال يسأل مفيش مشكلة. طيب. اوكي. نقدر ندخل كده على chapter 3 chapter 4. Okay, chapter 4 يا جماعة it's a very easy one. We can find that the title is congratulatory. يعني congratulation يعني. طبعا congratulation for whom or to whom? Congratulation لأن خلاص الحمد لله Charles Darnay was proved to be innocent. ثبتت براءته. فدلوقتي خلاص يعني أصبحنا الدنيا تمام. Outside the court بقى. دكتور مانات خلاص كل الويتنسز اللي كانوا فور يعني في صالح تشارلز دارناي واقفين معاه بره. دكتور مانات، لوسي مانات، مستر لوري، مستر سترايفر and even his assistant سيدني كارتون. كل دول يعني were around Charles Darnay but outside the court بقى لأن خلاص he was innocent هيروح بقى خلاص. طبعا دكتور مانات whose sanity يعني in a healthy condition had gradually returned to him. مين الوحيد who could charm دكتور مانات out of his black moods؟ خد بالك ان دكتور مانات برضو احيانا كانت الباور بتاعت الباست events اللي حصلت له in his life during his life especially when he stayed as I told you 18 years in the Bastille كانت لسه برضو had a very يعني bad effect on him. Who بقى could charm him out of his black moods؟ يعني who could take him okay away from his bad or black moods؟ اللي كان بيقدر يعمل كده يا شباب هي لوسي مانات. Okay. ليه؟ لأن she was the golden thread that united him to a past beyond his uh, misery and to a present that promised hope. علشان كده Lucy Manette was the only one who could help her father. طيب خلاص كل الناس واقفة طبعا and they were so happy because Charles Darnay was innocent. And Charles Darnay is saying here to Mr. Stryver, I owe you my life, Mr. Stryver. طبعا because Mr. Stryver saved Charles Darnay from death. And here, Mr. Stryver is saying, I'm glad, I'm very happy to have cleared your name, Mr. Darnay. It was a terrible false charge against you, but a dangerous one. Of course, a dangerous one. لأنه if he was punished لو كان اتعاقب بسبب الجريمة اللي هو أصلا ما عملهاش he didn't do that at all. He wasn't a spy. كان على طول he would lose his life. عشان كده here we have a very important question which is the first comment, I owe you my life, Mr. Stryver. طبعا these words were said by Charles Darnay to whom يا جماعة? To Mr. Stryver, the lawyer. طب when? إمتى? When they were outside the court. It's okay? After the trial, you can say after the trial. طب Darnay wanted to thank Mr. Stryver طبعا as he had cleared his name from being accused as a spy. Mr. Stryver was glad to do that. طبعا. After that طبعا خلاص كله مشي. I mean here Mr. Lorry, Mr. Stryver, Lucy Manette, and her father, Dr. Manette, except Sidney Carton. So in the street now, outside the court, we can find Charles Darnay and Sidney Carton. طيب قدامنا 10 minutes, it's okay. Charles Darnay طبعا when he was with Sidney Carton طبعا Sidney Carton he was يعني jealous of Charles Darnay. Sidney Carton يا جماعة when he looked at Lucy Manette يعني he found himself يعني maybe that he loved her at the beginning. وطبعا لوسي مانيت at the end of chapter 3 she fainted أغمى عليها وده دلالة على إنها كانت يعني إيه برضو لحد ما متأثرة شوية بتشارلز دارني. فده ادى إحساس يعني to Sidney Carton that he was jealous of كان غيران شويتين من تشارلز دارني. So he wanted to يعني spend some time with him and he asked him that we can go to a tavern, a small inn, to have يعني a drink with each other. When they went there, I mean here Sidney Carton and Charles Darnay, they sat with each other. And Sidney Carton started his conversation with Charles Darnay by saying, Miss Manette is a very beautiful lady. She seemed really worried about you today. And he said it in a bad way. Darnay was a polite man. يعني Charles Darnay was a polite young man and he didn't talk. He didn't say anything. But he said to him, I don't, but يعني he thanked Sidney Carton for saving his life. شكره. لأن خلي بالك برضه إن Sidney Carton played a very important role in this trial. لأن لولاه ولولا الشبه اللي ما بينه وما بين Charles Darnay would lose his life. عشان كده هنا he said to him, I mean here Sidney Carton, rudely in a very يعني impolite way. I don't want your thanks and I don't think I like you anyway. طبعا this was the first meeting between them يعني to talk to each other. It's okay. So Charles Darnay برضو tried to prove for this man, for Sidney Carton, that he was a polite one and said to him, as a kind of thank you please let me pay the bill. خلينا ندفع الايه الحساب. يوم سيدني كارتون ردد عليه برد غريب جدا. Well, since you are going to pay, let me order another bottle of wine. And then Charles Darnay left the place. Carton was alone. طبعا كارتون يا جماعة آه للأسف الشديد he had great abilities and good emotions لكن للأسف الشديد he was unable to help himself. Okay يعني he liked his life like that ما بيحبش he didn't want to change himself at all رغم انه يعتبر هو الاسيستنت بتاع مستر سترايفر لكن خد بالك in fact تشارلز ديكنز بقى الرايتر بتاعنا بيقول لنا in fact he did all the real detective work for Stryver. خلي بالك he was good at speaking in front of the court. Carton was very smart and clever at finding hidden clues لكن للأسف الشديد اللي كان بياخد الكريدت والريبيوتيشن السمعة والأونر المجد والفخر هو مستر سترايفر على حساب سيدني كارتون. But سيدني كارتون يعني للأسف الشديد هو حابب حياته كده. مستر سترايفر هو بقى اللي واخد الكريدت كله وريبيوتيشن على حساب سيدني كارتون. طيب اوكي افتر ذات بقى طبعا هو سيدني كارتون كان معروف بانه ذا جاكل لكن مستر سترايفر was known as the lion معروف as the court he was the lion. It's okay. Another part in this chapter in Mr. Lorry went to have lunch with with Dr. Manette and his daughter Lucy because as you know Mr. Lorry was a friend of Dr. Manette and when he went there he found Miss Pross but Miss Pross looked very cross, looked angry. Why? Let's see. Miss Pross here is saying, I'm not comfortable having hundreds of visitors coming to see my Lucy. No one is worthy of my ladybird. طبعا, as you know that Miss Pross considered Lucy Manette as her little daughter. Okay? علشان كده كانت بتخاف عليها جدا ومش عاجبها ابدا هم مش hundreds of visitors ولا حاجه هم 2 visitors بس اللي بيجوا يزوروهم يوميا اللي هم مين سيدني كارتون because سيدني كارتون became a friend a close friend to this family and طبعا of course مين تشارلز دارناي ف مس بروس مش عاجبها الكلام ده عشان كده مستر لوري is telling us don't be very or don't be over protective Miss Pross someone will win her heart one day so يعني don't be over protective. After that lunch time came and they went to have lunch together. I mean here Mr. Lorry and Lucy Manette and Dr. Manette. And then Charles Renee came to have tea with them and then Sydney Carton. But while they were having tea, Dr. Manette stood up and said a storm is coming because the wind was blowing and it was raining heavily. So he said, a storm is coming, but it is coming slowly. It is surely coming. طبعا الرايتر هنا قايل لنا البوينت دي في الآخر بيدينا hint كده because he will talk after that about the French Revolution. طيب تعال نشوف بقى the most important questions in this chapter. The second comment, I don't want your thanks and I don't think I like you anyway. طبعا these words were said by Sydney Carton to Charles Darnay when they went together to drink some wine after the trial had finished and Darnay had been set free. It was clear that Carton كان باين جدا إن Carton ماله يا شباب dealt with Darnay in a bad way. But Darnay tried to be kind to Carton and wanted to leave him in a friendly way. Okay, and paid the bill. After that, the questions, who could charm Dr. Manette out of his black moods? Who could take Dr. Manette out of his black moods? طبعا, of course, the person was his daughter, Lucy Manette. Question number 2, what was Carton clever at? He was clever at finding hidden clues. Hidden clues. طبعا, Carton was a clever man, as I told you. What was Mr. Stryver known as? He was known as the lion, as he took all the credit and the reputation of a clever lawyer. I think now that the two chapters are so clear, uh, our session يعني خلاص only 1 minute اللي فاضل. مش كده حابب لو حد عنده سؤال، أنا فاتح المايك يا شباب. Any question? Any question؟ اللي عنده أي سؤال يا جماعة يقدر يفتح المايك، مفيش مشكلة. أنا فاتح المايك.
مستر
أيوه.
مستر هو انا ما اخدتش البوكلت وهو في اسئله ممكن احلها على الستوري من حته تانية، لسه
لا
ما
هو
استلمتش البوكلت.
بص يا حبيبتي، هو أسئلة البوكلت هو أنت اللي مطالبة بيها في الستوري، وهي الأسئلة اللي أنا كنت بعرضها دي من شوية أهي، أرجع لها تاني. هي دي اللي أنت مطالبة بيها في التشابترز دي. اوكي، يعني دي تشابتر 3 مثلا، دي الكويستشنز بتاعته. الكومنت تو كومنتس، وعندك كام كويستشن عليه questions. برضه تشابتر 4 نفس الكلام. اوكي.
اوكي تمام، شكرا.
العفو.
مستر،
ايوه.
طب شابتر 4 آخر
أيوة.
واحدة اللي هي what was Mr. Stryver known as،
ايوه.
ينفع تقولها معايا؟ يعني أنا عارفة سيدني كارتون لكن ما خدتش بالي.
مستر سترايفر he was known as the lion. كان مشهور بانه اللاين، هو الاسد بتاع المحاكم. ليه؟ لانه he was good at speaking، بيعرف يتكلم كويس. تمام. وطبعا هو he took all the credit، الناس كلها عارفاه. and the reputation of a clever lawyer. مين السبب في الكلام ده؟ كارتون. لان كارتون هو اللي كان بيدور له على الكلوز، الادله والمفاتيح بتاعت القضايا، وهو ياخدها على الجهاز ويروح يقولها في الايه، في المحكمه.